Hello, I'm David from Barclays.
He's lying.
I'm currently in the process of upgrading your account.
No, he isn't.
So I just need your full password.
No, he doesn't. It's a scam.
Once I've got that, I can send you a link to access the account.
That's also a scam. Every year, millions are lost to fraud. At Barclays, we'll never ask for your full password or PIN, so never give it out.
Thanks for your time.
At least that's true.
Now, another man who does not shirk his responsibilities just because it's a bank holiday, Mr. Peter Hitchens is here. Peter, very good morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad to see that you haven't headed off hot foot to the beach like so many people, no matter what the weather is. It's one of those great sort of British pastimes, isn't it? That you have to sit on the beach no matter whether it's raining, windy, no matter what's going on. You have to sit there until the end of the day.
I can't stand bank holidays. I've never seen the point of them. If you want to have an extra day in the week, why make it as much like Sunday as possible, only without the religious observance? I always thought they were dull and dispiriting stretches of time. I rather preferred what we used to call tank holidays in the Soviet Union, where at least you could go down to Red Square and watch some tanks. In this country, it's just everything that you want to do is either overcrowded or unavailable. So I go to work. I've been doing it for years and treat it as if it wasn't happening. I know that some people think that they're fantastic opportunities, but I think since paid holidays came in and everybody gets them who's employed, I think the point of bank holidays, which were a wonderful thing in the Victorian era when hardly anyone got any time off at all, has just faded away. And this one in particular, what's it for?
I know.
What are we marking here?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like it's the last bank holiday before everybody goes back to school. Well, you've already been off for 5 or 6 weeks, so I don't really need a holiday. But I see the TUC, back to its old tricks, is asking for 4 more bank holidays to be added to the calendar year on the grounds that we've got stingy entitlement to have time off in this country.
Well, I would support the institution of one bank holiday, and it would be a copy of the American Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, which would take place on a Thursday,
yes,
rather than on a Monday. Roundabout, I would suggest Winston Churchill's birthday to celebrate our national survival in 1940. It's something which really ought to be commemorated in the calendar. Also, a bank holiday on Thursday is wholly different in spirit and nature from one on a Monday. And if it has some reason for existing, I think, and for families to gather together on it, I always like the American Thanksgiving. It seems to me to be quite unique and totally unlike any British holiday.
Yes. And
well worth importing. But that's one I would support. But the others, frankly, you can keep. And certainly you get rid of May Day, because there's one absolute guarantee that the May bank holiday will be sleety, drizzly, or freezing cold. And it always only reminds me of poor old Michael Foote, who, charming as he in many ways was, doesn't really deserve to have a holiday in his memory.
No, I think the problem, of course, is that an awful lot of these holidays have just been around for such a long time that people kind of expect them. I'm like you. I mean, I've got no interest really having a bank holiday off. If I want to have a long weekend, I'll just take a long weekend when nobody else has got it.
But I mean, it's partly because of the crazy life that journalists lead. I mean, for many, many years, I haven't had what most people regard as a weekend. I've either worked regularly on Saturdays or regularly on Sundays. And especially when I worked abroad, there was no such thing really as a day off. If you were in the country that you were the resident correspondent in, you couldn't really, if the office called you up, say, well, actually, I'm on holiday. You were there. They paid for you to be there, and you jolly well had to drop whatever you were doing and get on with it. And that's the rule. So I'm in that way, my life is completely unlike most people's, and it has a lot to do with my attitude towards bank holidays. I can see why people might value them. I just don't like them myself, and I think actually if we got rid of a lot of them and introduced the idea I just suggested of a late November Thanksgiving Thursday, I think a lot of people would have more fun out of it.
Well, one of the nice things about Thanksgiving is it's completely and utterly unreligious. It's not really nailed to any particular creed or anything.
Sure, I mean there is an element in it. Who are you giving thanks to on these occasions? The United States is a curious country. It's simultaneously actively secular in an awful lot of things, but it's fundamentally religious. After all, it was founded by by Cromwellian Protestants. Cromwell very nearly went there himself because they wanted that sort of country. So I did. So if you want it to be religious, Americans of my acquaintance do go to church on Thanksgiving.
Yes, I mean some do, but what I suppose what I mean is it's not like Christmas, which is not necessarily celebrated by the Jewish community in New York, for example. When I lived there, Christmas is a much smaller holiday than Thanksgiving.
Yeah, okay. Christmas is probably one of the most irreligious holidays there is, though. If you actually are a Christian on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, you feel very strongly in a minority, I find.
Yes, I think that's probably
People
true.
are not celebrating the miraculous birth of television as much as anything else, as far as I can see.
Yes, although that's getting worse and worse and worse. You've got no chance, though, of course, you realise, Peter, of getting any kind of holiday based around Churchill. That would never do. You would be castigated into the fires of hell, wouldn't you?
Well, I was born on the St. Jude's Day, and he's the patron saint of lost causes. So I drop lost causes all the time. The thing is that most lost causes are also the best causes there are, so it gives me no pain. Maybe one day all the lost causes will be won.
Yes, very possibly so. Let's talk a bit about your column this week, because I found it fascinating as ever. A different take on the whole Afghanistan picture. You were basically arguing that all these people who want to go around the world saving it don't seem to care a jot about what's happening on their street corner.
Well, it doesn't seem to cross their mind that if that intervention might be necessary here. If you roam about a bit and read down pages and read local newspapers in this country, you see evidence of an awful lot of horrible things going on, which, if they were reported as happening in foreign countries, would no doubt lead the great and the good to demand that we intervene to do something about it. But here it is. We are here. We live here. These things are within our power. We understand our own country. And yet, for 50 years now, the policing of our streets and the suppression of crime and disorder has almost entirely ceased to happen. In the case that I mentioned, there was some poor young man who was hunted and stabbed to death by a basically feral gang of people who didn't care who he was. They just decided to stab him to death on the streets, for goodness sake, of Northwest 9 in London, near Colindale, where the old British newspaper library used to be.
Yes.
So that I'm faintly familiar with. I used to slog up there. You think, well, hang on a minute. Just a few years ago, I used to live in a very charming village on the edge of Portsmouth called Alderstoke. And I read, sitting in Moscow at the time, I read of some terrible killing there where a man was who upbraided some people for making noise in the street was kicked to death. I thought, hang on a minute, this is my country. I grew up there. It wasn't like that when I was there. Why doesn't somebody do anything about it? So I say, if you're so dead keen and passionate to intervene, then start at home. Yeah. And once you've sorted out this country and made it into not a paradise, but a reasonably well-functioning country where a young man can walk home from work safely on the street in northwest London, and then you might think of spreading the benefits and blessings of your civilization elsewhere. But until you can civilize Britain, I think it's quite a nerve to go around telling the Afghans that you're coming to civilize them. And it's the arrogance of it, and also the strange obsession with it. All kinds of people who completely surprised me have been enraged by President Biden doing probably the one sensible thing he will do in his entire life, of pulling out of Afghanistan. Now, rearguard actions and retreats are always costly, and they are very difficult things to do. And no doubt this one could have been done better, and no doubt all the people who say this one could have been done better would have done this one better if they had themselves been in Kabul. But leaving that aside, I think the decision to get out, one which I've called on our own government to do for many, many years, was a right decision, and one which should be applauded. And yet people are moaning on about the defeat and betrayal and everything else. People who really ought not to say this kind of thing. And I really don't see that that is actually a true reflection of the needs of this country, to constantly demand that we intervene elsewhere. Also, there's a fantastic overestimate of our power. Do people know how tiny our army is, or how ill-equipped? You know, we now have a smaller army than the Nazi occupiers allowed Vichy France to have. They gave them a token army of 100,000. Ours is smaller than that. And we expect we can go around the world intervening like some great empire, telling people how they must live and how they must treat women and all the rest of it. Who are we to do this when we can't even keep our own house in order?
Interesting point. I mean, I suppose the argument about the world's most dangerous aspects is that it's all very well to say we should leave Afghanistan, but if by leaving Afghanistan we make the world a more dangerous place just because of the way of things, then perhaps it's not such a good idea. And if we also end up importing an awful lot of people from Afghanistan as a result of rescuing them, then that's also not a great idea.
Well, that's another question. I mean, as I say, anybody who actually now takes an Afghan family into his or her home, well, I'd have no criticism of them. That's immensely charitable action. But everybody who thinks somebody else should take an Afghan into their home, or thinks somebody else should pay for Afghans who settled in this country, I don't have quite so much time for. But it's a fantasy that Afghanistan, if we leave it alone, will somehow be a source of danger to us. The reason why the wild mujahideen grew up in Afghanistan was precisely because the United States government put the mujahideen of Afghanistan in touch with the Saudi Arabians and equipped them to try and do the Russians down back at the end of the 1980s, and that's the origin of all this. There's no other real organic connection between Pashtun people in Afghanistan and international terrorism. And once we've gone, they have quite enough problems. They barely have an economy after all these years and years of conflict. And they seem to me to be entitled to as much help as we can give them, honestly, to rebuild the country they used to have, which I have to say, from accounts that I've read back in the 50s and early 60s, was quite a functioning and happy place, which outside interventions of all kinds have done down. I always remember with these discussions, I once had a terrible experience in Mogadishu in Somalia, where I went pretty much by accident and nearly died of fright. And the thing about Somalia is that about 30 or 40 years before, I've shown photographs of it, Mogadishu was like an Italian city with white-gloved policemen directing traffic and shiny cars going down streets with shops and well-dressed people. And by the time foreign intervention had gone on there, practically every outside power you could think of, all the clever people in Somalia have gone and live elsewhere in places like California. And the place is a terrifying hellhole. It was we, by intervening, who made it like that. Somalia, left to its own devices, would have been a much happier place. There is no, as far as I know, no pattern which suggests that most of the time these interventions make things better. Occasionally you can say that they might do, if you're very lucky, but almost all of them end in tragedy.
Sure, but I mean, I've seen, as I'm sure you have, pictures of Kabul and Beirut and even Tehran back in the 1970s when, people are sitting out in pavement cafes, the women are walking around without wearing burqas, and it's all very westernized looking. Now, I don't know whether that would be put down to Western intervention or whether that was how civilized those countries then were, because it would seem to me that an awful lot of what's happened to those three cities anyway has been down to Muslim fundamentalism.
Well, I think you could always say made an exception for Kabul as against the rest of Afghanistan, being the capital with the airport and international contacts. It was going to be, how shall I put it, more influenced by the outside world than the rest of the country. But there's no doubt those pictures exist. And so you could say that it's the same actually of Gaza, where Israelis living nearby used to go for the nightlife. I've talked to them about this. You can imagine that now, nightlife under Hamas. But that's what used to happen. It's another world. I don't think it was, and I tweeted last week an extraordinary excerpt from my old 1938 edition of the Children's Encyclopedia recounting how in the 1920s an actively westernizing Afghan government tried to push the liberalism, particularly the European-type rights for women. And in the end, the government fell, and everybody had to be airlifted out of Kabul in 1929. So the history repeats itself over and over again. But a balance can be found, I think, in a lot of places which used to be both reasonably modern and open in a way that they're not now, and are now full of burqas and niqabs and all the rest of it. The reason for the change is the growing influence of Saudi Arabia all over the Islamic world, which has grown stronger and stronger. I think largely, I'm afraid to say, encouraged by the United States. And I think it's that influence which has made many of these things change.
Yes, I think you're right. Peter, stay with us if you would. A couple of other things to talk to you about coming up very shortly. Peter Hitchens from the Mail on Sunday, of course, talking to us as he does every Monday right here on Talk Radio, the home of common sense. He's making a lot of it as ever. We'll be back with Peter Hitchens after this.
Mike Graham on Talk Radio.
Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio, now available, of course, on TV as well. Go to talkradio.tv where you can find where to watch us, and, of course, you can download the app from the Talk Radio TV on the App Store. Let's talk some more to Peter Hitchens, who's with us. Peter, there was an interesting version of an old University Challenge show doing the rounds of the weekend. You wrote briefly about how 20 years ago you captained a team of tabloid newspaper men and women against Boris Johnson and his team of top intellectuals from the broadsheets.
Well, I didn't captain it. The captain of our team was Anne Leslie.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Who I could be seen having the occasional acerbic exchange during the Anne Leslie of the Daily Mail, with whom I can be seen having the occasional acerbic exchange during the quiz.
Yes.
On one occasion, for instance, I gave her the answer that the President of the United States, who was being referred to, was Woodrow Wilson, and she transmitted this as Andrew Wilson. I thought, oh no, she's not the point.
I must admit, I did used to enjoy standing at the bar with Anne Leslie on various occasions. She was a very entertaining woman.
Indeed, but I wasn't very entertained by that particular moment. There was one other as well where I said, come on, you make your mind up. You're the captain. If you listen very carefully, you'll pick things up. But what I now know about University Challenge, of course, is it's recorded and edited, and the contributions people aren't always faithfully reflected. You can't see me, for instance, frantically pushing on the button,
right,
which Tony Parsons, who was really the star of our side, constantly beat me to. There I was. I had the answer. I thought, right, show off, Hitchens. Now press the button. No buzzer, because Parsons already got it. You're fighting as much against your own teammates as you are against the other side. I remember it with some affection. It was quite fun to do. The bizarre thing, I can't remember getting there or going back.
Right. Where did you do it? Was it done in Broadcasting House or something?
No, it was done in Manchester.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it still is. I think you still have to go up to Salford to do it.
Right.
It was, I think in the same studios as Coronation Street in those days.
Oh.
But nothing about it. But extraordinarily, although it was, I think, probably the first time University Challenge had a non-student contest. Who actually they had teams who were not currently university teams. The episode vanished, and I was puzzled by this, and I still am, because I thought it's fascinating, particularly since it contained the future Prime Minister.
Yeah.
On occasions making a fool of himself, and on occasions showing that he does actually know quite a bit. He was the star of his own side, beyond doubt. I was surprised it had vanished. So when it reappeared again, it just popped up as if it had floated up from the bottom of some gigantic pond, popped up on YouTube. And so I thought, right, time to give this some publicity. A lot of people would like to see it. And it's still there. You can reach it by going to the Peter Hitchens blog if you can't find it any other way. But I think it's a fascinating watch in many ways. One of the interesting things about it is the way people talk. And Jerry Paxman, who am I to talk, but he's far more la-di-da in 1999 than he is now. The other thing, of course, is that the questions are much more interesting than they are now. All the questions now about 19th century German mathematicians or Polynesian islands. In those days, they were actually about things people might know the answers to, and therefore it was more entertaining to watch. I think the programme's gone down the plumbing, frankly. I only watch it because I quite enjoy being irritated.
Yes. Well, at the risk of sounding like somebody who just complains about television not being as good as it was, it really isn't as good as it was. I don't quite know what happened, but at some point or other, almost everything that used to be any good, in which I include Newsnight and Question Time and University Challenge and the news, which are all the things I used to watch, I just don't bother anymore.
News is unwatchable. I mean, I think of those nights when I used to watch Reggie Bosanquet and Hannah Ford doing news at 10, and that's after I switched over from the BBC. I spent hours watching news. Now I can't stand it. We call it Vremya in our house because it reminds us of the old Soviet TV.
It's become a kind of, it's become a sort of social policy unit of some description.
Incredibly boring. I listen to the news on the radio now instead, because at least you might get some news from time to time. And as for this thing last night, Vigil, the new nuclear submarine drama.
Oh yes, I heard about that. Yeah.
I mean, for goodness sake, I can speak with some authority because I have actually spent a weekend as an interloper in a nuclear submarine.
And there's a very famous picture of you standing on it.
Well, I'm more as famous as I can make it. But one of the things about it was how extraordinarily friendly they were to outsiders. We had a very good dinner in the wardroom with quite a lot of red wine consumed, followed by a film show as well. It's made out to be a lot more austere than it may have got worse. Now they have these things are the size of Channel steamers anyway. They are enormous. Even the Polaris boats were big. The Trident ones are colossal. But I can't. And the Navy is a very friendly service in my experience as well. So here's this detective. It goes aboard and is treated in you might say the ideal way to make her hostile and suspicious. It doesn't look like the Navy to me at all. But there you are. That's what the BBC thinks the Navy is like. So presumably they will refuse cooperation at some point.
Well, I can only assume that everything that they now make, including all the drama, has to go through a sort of filtering process, which takes probably at least the best part of a year to make sure that they've knocked all the rough edges off and they haven't offended anyone.
And I haven't even mentioned all the politically correct aspects of it because why bother? The astonishing thing would be if it didn't have them.
Right. But this is the weird thing about the BBC. Every so often, I'll switch on the television and there'll be a sort of random episode of Fawlty Towers on, which is still very funny, but it's riddled with all sorts of things which would never make it past the BBC censors nowadays when it comes to calling people names, insulting people, xenophobia, racism, whatever you want to call it. It's full of it. And they put that out quite happily without any sort of to do.
Well, of course, if they do try and fiddle with it, there's trouble. I'm in two minds about this. It may be that we were too casual about these things. It may be that we were making people unnecessarily unhappy by being too relaxed. I don't know. I can't make my mind up whether it was that or whether because we laughed about these things and were more open about them, actually that was part of the stage of getting them under control and making this what still seems to me, and I've seen a lot of societies, still seems to me to be one of the most tolerant societies I've ever come across in my life. I can't help thinking that going through that stage of comedy when things were out in the open helped to make it so rather than made it worse. But I don't think has ever done any work on that. But I suspect it's true that it was a safety valve during a period of transition when we altered and did some good. But some of it, look back on now, you can see why people might be upset. I for instance, have always been, when the Dam Busters film is shown, there are some people who resent the fact that the name of the dog is not spoken out loud anymore. I think it shouldn't be. I sometimes think some of the people but actually it's not.
No, I think that's right. And I think it's quite a sensible point of view to have. Peter, thank you very much indeed. As ever, we'll speak to you soon. Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens there with, again, a very sensible view of the world, which is far from what we get in most places apart from here on Talk Radio, where sense is absolutely the currency in which we deal all the time. 0344 499 1000.